If you want to know what God's grace and mercy looks like, you can look at me. At the age of 5, I contracted a disease called periorbital cellulitis. My eyes were swollen shut, and I had an infection that reached the base of my brain. My condition was so grave that doctors here did not know how to treat me or what to do. They told my parents that I immediately had to be rushed to Texas Children's Hospital. Upon arrival at Texas Children's Hospital, doctors and surgeons told my mother and father that if I were to survive, I would be a vegetable, I would be brain damaged, I would be blind, I would be in a vegetative state, I would never walk, I would never talk, and I could never live a normal life. While at Texas Children's, God allowed a world-renowned surgeon to be there who specialized in treating children who had periorbital cellulitis. After 2 10-hour surgeries, God allowed me to survive. He allowed me to walk out of Texas Children's Hospital. He allowed me to live a beautiful and wonderful life. He allowed me to have 20/20 vision, and he allowed me to let others see how good God's grace and mercy can be. In 1998, I contracted bacterial meningitis. In addition to contracting bacterial meningitis, I also contracted a very bad case of the shingles. Once again, doctors told my mother and father to prepare for the worst. If I had any family, they needed to come and see me to say goodbye because it did not look good. But I had a praying mother and a praying father and a praying family that talked to God and did not give up on God because he never gives up on you. 6 weeks later, I walked out of doctor's hospital free of meningitis, free of shingles. I did not lose any vision or have any visible scars or visible disabilities from going through this episode. Of all of the trials and tribulations that I experienced, I believe that my faith was tested the greatest in the year 2020. In June of 2020, my father contracted COVID. My father was in a rehab facility, and they told us that he contracted this disease. Upon arrival to the hospital, my father had to be admitted to ICU, and a week later, he was put on a ventilator for 2 months. In July of 2020, doctors called us and said that we need to say our goodbyes to my father. We went to St. Elizabeth Hospital. We prayed. We asked God to touch my father, and that's exactly what he did. To see my father laying there, it was very hurting. It was very devastating, and it definitely shook my faith. But I know that if God could heal me, he could heal my father too. In November of 2020, my mother and I contracted COVID-19. My mother was in Houston visiting my father, who had just had a procedure. I was able to quarantine at home, but unknowingly at the time, that would be the last time that I would see my mother. My mother spent 4 weeks in the hospital at Methodist Hospital. 2 of those last weeks she spent on a ventilator. I remember getting a call on December 4th, 2020, saying that my brother and I needed to rush to Methodist Hospital. My mother's condition had gotten more grave, and they told us that it would be just a matter of hours and she would be gone. My brother and I arrived. The chaplain met us at the room. We prayed and we asked for God's will to be done. That day, I had to leave Methodist Hospital with my mother's things and not my mother. I was hurt. I was broken. I was devastated. But I still knew that God was in the midst. In January, we had to tell my father, who was also in the hospital, that my mother had passed away. It was one of the hardest things I ever had to experience. It was one of the hardest things that I had to deal with, to tell my father that his wife of 48 years had passed away. After we told my father, he said, I knew something had happened, I just didn't know what. In February, my father informed my brother and I that he was getting tired and that he wanted to go to heaven to be with my mother. And since he had made peace with that decision, it's also a decision that I had to make peace with. On May 16th, 2021, just 5 months after losing my mother, I lost my father as well. I was shaken. I was broken. I was angry. I was hurt. I was upset. But I still had God on my side. God was in the midst, and God was there through all of my trials, all of my tribulations, and all of my hard times.